Hello, lovely people. So we're on chapter 14 of Heindel's Rosicrucian Cosmo conception, the occult analysis of Genesis. Limitations of the Bible. In our study thus far, previous to chapter 13, comparatively little reference has been made to the Bible, but we shall now devote our attention to it for some time. Not that it's intended to attempt a vindication of the Bible, in the form in which it's commonly known to us at the present day, as the only true and inspired word of God. Nevertheless, it's true that it contains much valuable occult knowledge. This is, to a great extent, hidden beneath interpolations and obscured by the arbitrary withholding of certain parts as being apocryphal. The occult scientist who knows the intended meaning can, of course, easily see which portions are original and which have been interpolated. Yet, if we take the first chapter of Genesis even as it stands, in the best translations we possess, we shall find that it unfolds the identical scheme of evolution which has been explained in the preceding portion of this work, and harmonises quite well with the occult information in regard to periods, revolutions and races, etc. The outlines given are necessarily of the briefest and most condensed character, an entire period being covered in a score of words, but nevertheless the outlines are there. Before proceeding with an analysis, it's necessary to say that the words of the Hebrew language, particularly the Old Style, run into one another and are not divided as those of our language. Add to this that there is a custom of leaving out vowels from the writing, so that in reading much depends upon where and how they are inserted, and it will be seen how great are the difficulties to be surmounted in ascertaining the original meaning. A slight change may entirely alter the signification of almost any sentence. In addition to these great difficulties, we must bear in mind that of the 47 translators of the King James Version, that most commonly used in England and America, only 3 were Hebrew scholars, and of those, 2 died before the Psalms had been translated. We must still further take into consideration that the act which authorized the translation prohibited the translators from any rendition that would greatly deviate from or tend to disturb the already existing beliefs. It's evident, therefore, that the chances of getting a correct translation were very small indeed. Nor were conditions much more favourable in Germany, for there Martin Luther was the sole translator, and even he did not translate from the original Hebrew, but merely from a Latin text. Most of the versions used in continental Protestant countries today are simply translations into the different languages of Luther's translations. True, there have been revisions, but they have not greatly improved matters. Moreover, there is a large number of people in this country who insist that the English text of the King James Version is absolutely correct from cover to cover, as though the Bible had been originally written in English, and the King James Version were a certified copy of the original manuscript. So the old mistakes are still there, in spite of the efforts which have been made to eradicate them. It must also be noted that those who originally wrote the Bible didn't intend to give out the truth in such plain form that he who ran might read. Nothing was further from their thoughts than to write an open book of God. The great occultists who wrote the Zohar are very emphatic upon this point. The secrets of the Torah were not to be understood by all, as the following quotation will show. Woe to the man who sees in the Torah, the law, only simple recitals and ordinary words, because if in truth it contained only these, we would even today be able to compose a Torah much more worthy of admiration. but it's not so. Each word of the Torah contains an elevated meaning and a sublime mystery. The recitals of the Torah are the vestments of the Torah. Woe to him who takes this vestment of the Torah for the Torah itself. The simple take notice of the garments and recitals of the Torah alone. They know no other thing. They see not that which is concealed under the vestment. The more instructed men do not pay attention to the vestment, but to the body which it envelopes. In the preceding words, the allegorical meanings are plainly implied. Paul also unequivocally says that the story of Abraham and the two sons whom he had by Sarah and Hagar is purely allegorical. That's in Galatians. Many passages are veiled, others are to be taken verbatim, and no one who has not the occult key is able to find the deep truth hidden in what is often a very hideous garment. The secrecy regarding these deep matters and invariable use of allegories, where the mass of people were permitted to come into contact with occult truths, will also be apparent from the practice of Christ, who always spoke to the multitude in parables and afterwards privately explaining to his disciples the deeper meaning contained therein. On several occasions he imposed secrecy upon them with regard to his private teachings. Paul's methods are also in harmony with this, for he gives milk or the more elementary teaching to the babes in faith, reserving the meat or deeper teaching for those strong, those who had qualified themselves to understand and receive them. The Jewish Bible was originally written in Hebrew, but we don't possess one single line of the original writings. As early as 260 BC, the Septuagint, a translation into Greek, was brought forth. Even in the time of Christ, there was already the utmost confusion and diversity of opinion regarding what was to be admitted as original and what had been interpolated. It wasn't until the return from Babylonian exile that the scribes began to piece together the different writings, and not until around 500 AD did the Talmud appear, giving the first perfect text resembling the present one, which in view of the foregoing facts, giving the first text resembling the present one, which in view of the foregoing facts cannot be perfect. The Talmud was then taken in hand by the Masoretic school, which from 590 to about 800 AD was principally in Tiberias. With great and painstaking labour, a Hebrew Old Testament was produced, which is the nearest to the original we have at the present time. This Masoretic text will be used in the following elucidation of Genesis, and not relying upon the work of one translator, it will be supplemented by a German translation, the work of three eminent Hebrew scholars, Arnhem, Sachs and Joule first, who cooperated with the fourth, Dr. Zuntz, the latter also being the editor. In the beginning. The opening sentence of Genesis is a very good example of what has been stated about the interpretation of the Hebrew text, and which may be changed by differently placing the vowels and dividing the words in another way. There are two well-recognized methods of reading this sentence. One is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The other is, out of the ever-existing essence of space, the twofold energy formed the double heaven. Much has been said and written as to which of these two interpretations is correct. The difficulty is that the people want something settled and definite. They take the stand that if a certain explanation is true, all others must be wrong. But emphatically, this is not the way to get at truth, which is many-sided and multiplex. Each occult truth requires examination from many different points of view, and each viewpoint presents a certain phase of the truth, and all of them are necessary to get a complete, definite conception of whatever is under consideration. The very fact that this sentence and many others in the vestment of the Torah can thus be made to yield many meanings, while confusing to the uninitiated, is illuminative to those who have the key, and the transcendental wisdom of the wonderful intelligences who inspired the Torah is thereby shown. Had the vowels been inserted and a division made into words, there would have been only one way of reading it, and these grand and sublime mysteries could not have been hidden therein. That would have been the proper method to pursue if the authors had meant to write an open book of God, but that was not their purpose. It was written solely for the initiated, and can be read understandingly by them only. It would have required much less skill to have written the book plainly than to have concealed its meaning. But no pains are ever spared, however, to bring the information in due time to those who are entitled to it, while withholding it from those who have not yet earned the right to possess it. The nebula theory. Regarded by the light thrown upon the genesis and evolution of our system, it's plain that both renderings of the opening sentence in the book of Genesis are necessary to an understanding of the subject. The first tells that there was a beginning of our evolution, in which the heavens were created. The other interpretation supplements the first statement by adding that the heavens and the earth were created out of the ever-existing essence and not out of nothing, as is jeeringly pointed out by the materialist. The cosmic root substance is gathered together and set in motion. The rings formed by the inertia of the revolving mass break away from the central part, forming planets, as the modern scientist with remarkable ingenuity has reasoned out. Occult and modern science are in perfect harmony as to the modus operandi. There is nothing in these statements inconsistent with the two theories, as will presently be shown. Occult science teaches that God instituted the process of formation and is constantly guiding the system in a definite path. The modern scientist, in refutation of what he calls a foolish idea, and to demonstrate that a God is not necessary, takes a basin of water and pours a little oil into it. The water and the oil represent space and fire mist, respectively. He now commences to turn the oil around with a needle, bringing it into the form of a sphere. This, he explains, represents the central sun. As he turns the oil ball faster and faster, it bulges at the equator and throws off a ring. The ring breaks and the fragments coalesce, forming a smaller ball, which circles around the sun. Then he pityingly asks the occult scientist, "Do you not see how it's done? There is no need for your God or any supernatural force." The occultist readily agrees that a solar system may be formed in approximately the manner illustrated, but he marvels greatly that a man possessing the clear intuition enabling him to perceive with such accuracy the operation of cosmic processes, and the intellect to conceive this brilliant demonstration of this monumental theory, he should at the same time be quite unable to see that in his demonstration he himself plays the part of God. His was the extraneous power that placed the oil in the water, where it would have remained inert and shapeless through all eternity had he not supplied the force that set it in motion, and thereby causing it to shape itself into representation of sun and planets. His was the thought which designed the experiment using the oil, water and force, thus illustrating in a splendid manner the triune God working in cosmic substance to form a solar system. The attributes of God are will, wisdom, and activity. The scientist has will to make the experiment. He has ingenuity to supply ways and means for the demonstration. And this ingenuity corresponds to wisdom, the second attribute to God. He also has the muscular force necessary to perform the action, corresponding to activity, which is the third attribute of God. Further, the universe is not a vast perpetual motion machine, which, when once set in motion, keeps on without any internal cause or guiding force. That also is proven by the experiment of the scientist. For the moment he ceases to turn the oil ball, the orderly motion of his miniature planets also cease, and all return to a shapeless mass of oil floating on the water. In a corresponding manner, the universe would at once dissolve into thin space, if God for one moment ceased to exert his all-embracing care and energizing activity. The second interpretation of Genesis is marvellously exact in its description of a twofold formative energy. It doesn't specifically state that God is triune. The reader's knowledge of that fact is taken for granted. It states the exact truth when it says that only two forces are active in the formation of the universe. When the first aspect of the triune God manifests as the will to create, it arouses the second aspect, which is wisdom, to design a plan for the future universe. The first manifestation of force is imagination. After this primal force of imagination has conceived the idea of a universe, the third aspect, which is activity, working in cosmic substance, produces motion. This is the second manifestation of force. Motion alone, however, is not sufficient. To form a system of worlds, it must be orderly motion. Wisdom is therefore necessary to guide motion in an intelligent manner to produce definite results. Thus we find the opening sentence of the book of Genesis tells us that in the beginning, orderly rhythmic motion in cosmic root substance formed the universe. The creative hierarchies. The second interpretation of the opening sentence also gives us a fuller idea of God when it speaks of the twofold energy, pointing to the positive and negative phases of the one spirit of God in manifestation. In harmony with the teaching of occult science, God is represented as a composite being. This is accentuated in the remaining verses of the chapter. In addition to the creative hierarchies which worked voluntarily in our evolution, there are 7 others which belong to our evolution and are co-workers with God in the formation of the universe. In the first chapter of Genesis, these hierarchies are called Elohim. The name signifies a host of dual and double-sexed beings. The first part of the word is Eloah, which is a feminine noun, the letter H indicating the gender. If a single feminine being were meant, the word Eloah would have been used. The feminine plural is Oth. So if the intention had been to indicate a number of gods of the feminine gender, the correct word to use would have been Eloath. Instead of either of those forms, however, we find the masculine plural ending, im, added to the feminine noun, Eloah, indicating a host of male-female double-sexed beings, expressions of the dual positive-negative creative energy. The plurality of creators is again implied in the latter part of the chapter, where these words are ascribed to the Elohim. Let us make man in our image. after which it's inconsistently added he made them male and female. The translators have here rendered the puzzling word Elohim, which was decidedly not only a plural word, but also both masculine and feminine, as being the equivalent of the singular sexless word God. Yet could they have done differently, even had they known? They were forbidden to disturb existing ideas. It wasn't truth at any price, but peace at any price, that King James desired, his sole anxiety being to avoid any controversy that might create a disturbance in his kingdom. The plural them is also used where the creation of man is mentioned, clearly indicating that the reference is to the creation of Adam, the human species, and not Adam, the individual. We've shown that 6 creative hierarchies, besides the Lords of Flame, the cherubim and seraphim, and the 2 unnamed hierarchies which have passed into liberation, were active in assisting the virgin spirits, which in themselves form a 7th hierarchy. The cherubim and seraphim had nothing to do with the creation of form, therefore they are not mentioned in the chapter under consideration, which deals principally with the form side of creation. Here we find mentioned only the 7 creative hierarchies which did the actual work of bringing man to where he acquired a dense physical form, through which the indwelling spirit could work. After a description of each part of the work of creation, it's said, and Elohim saw that it was good. This is said 7 times, the last being on the 6th day, when the human form had been created. It's stated that on the 7th day Elohim rested. This is all in accord with our occult teaching of the part taken by each of the creative hierarchies in the work of evolution down to the present period. It's also taught that in the present epoch the gods and the creative hierarchies have withdrawn from active participation, that man may work out his own salvation, leaving the necessary guidance of ordinary humanity to the elder brothers, who are now the mediators between man and gods. The Saturn period. Having satisfied ourselves that the beginning of our solar system and the work of the creative hierarchies, as described by occult science, harmonize with the teachings of the Bible, we will now examine the Bible account of the different days of creation and see how they agree with the occult teachings relative to the Saturn, Sun and Moon periods, the 3 1/2 revolutions of the Earth period, and the Polarian, Hyperborean, Lemurian and Atlantean epochs, which have preceded the present Orion epoch. Naturally, a detailed account could not be given in a few lines like the first chapter of Genesis, but the main points are there in orderly succession, very much like an algebraical formula for creation. The second verse proceeds, "The earth was waste and uninhabited, and darkness rested upon the face of the deep, and the spirits of the Elohim floated above the deep." In the beginning of manifestation, that which is now the earth was in the Saturn period, and in exactly the condition described, as may be seen by referring to the descriptions already given of that period. It wasn't without form and void, as expressed in the King James Version. It was hot, and thus well defined and separate from the deep of space, which was cold. It's true that it was dark, but it could be dark and still be hot, for dark heat necessarily precedes glowing or visible heat. Above this dark earth of the Saturn period floated the creative hierarchies. They worked upon it from the outside and moulded it. The Bible refers to them as the spirits of the Elohim. The Sun period. The sun period is well described in the 3rd verse, which says, "And the Elohim said, Let there be light, and there was light." This passage has been jeered at as the most ridiculous nonsense. The scornful query has been put, how could there be light upon the earth when the sun was not made until the 4th day? The Bible narrator, however, is not speaking of the earth alone. He is speaking of the central fire mist, from which were formed the planets of our system, including the earth. Thus, when the nebula reached a state of glowing heat, which it did in the sun period, there was no necessity for an outside illuminant. The light was from within. In the 4th verse we read, "The Elohim differentiated between the light and the darkness." Necessarily, for the outside space was dark, in contradistinction to the glowing nebula which existed during the sun period. The moon period. The moon period is described in the 6th verse as follows, "And Elohim said, Let there be an expansion," translated firmament in other versions, "in the waters to divide the water from the water." This exactly describes conditions in the moon period, when the heat of the glowing fire mist and the cold of outside space had formed a body of water around the fiery core. The contact of fire and water generated steam, which is water in expansion, as our verse describes. It was different from the comparatively cool water, which constantly gravitated towards the hot fiery core to replace the outrushing steam. Thus there was a constant circulation of water held in suspension, and also an expansion. As the steam rushing outward from the fiery core formed an atmosphere of fire fog, it condensed by contact with outside space and returning again to the core to be reheated and perform another cycle. Thus there were two kinds of water and a division between them, as stated in the Bible. The dense water was nearest the fiery core. The expanded water or steam was on the outside. This also harmonises with the scientific theory of modern times. First the dark heat, then the glowing nebula, later the outside moisture and inside heat, and finally incrustation. The Earth period. The Earth period is next described. Before we take up its description, however, we have to deal with the recapitulations. The verses quoted and the descriptions given will also correspond to the recapitulatory periods. Thus, what is said of the Saturn period describes also the condition of the system when it emerges from any of the rest periods. The descriptions of the Saturn, Sun and Moon periods would therefore correspond to the first 3 revolutions of our present Earth period, and the following would correspond with conditions on Earth in the present revolution. In the 9th verse we read, "And Elohim said, Let the waters be divided from the dry land. And Elohim called the dry land earth." This refers to the first firm incrustation heat and moisture had generated the solid body of our present globe. The Polarian epoch, the 9th verse, which describes the Earth period in this 4th revolution, where the real Earth period work commenced, also describes the formation of the mineral kingdom and the recapitulation by man of the mineral stage in the Polarian epoch. Each epoch is also a recapitulation of the previous stage. Just as there are recapitulations of globes, revolutions and periods, so there are on each globe recapitulations of all that's gone before. These recapitulations are endless. There is always a spiral within a spiral in the atom, in the globe, and in all other phases of evolution. Complicated and bewildering as this may appear at first, it's really not so difficult to understand. There is an orderly method running through it all, and in time one is able to perceive and follow the workings of this method, as a clue leading through a maze. Analogy is one of the best helps to an understanding of evolution. The Hyperborean epoch is described in verses 11 to 19 as the work of the fourth day. It's here recorded that Elohim created the plant kingdom, the sun, moon and stars. The Bible agrees with the teaching of modern science that plants succeeded the mineral. The difference between the two teachings is in regard to the time when the earth was thrown off from the central mass. Science asserts that it was before the formation of any incrustation which could be called mineral and plant. If we mean such minerals and plants as we have today, that assertion is correct. There was no dense material substance, but nevertheless the first incrustation that took place in the central sun was mineral. The Bible narrator gives only the principal incidents. It's not recorded that the incrustation melted when it was thrown off from the central mass as a ring which broke, the fragments afterwards coalescing. In a body as small as our Earth, the time required for recrystallization was so comparatively short that the historian doesn't mention it, nor the further subsidiary fact that the melting processes took place once more when the moon was thrown off from the earth. He probably reasons that one who is entitled to occult information is already in possession of such minor details as those. The plants of the incrustation of the central fire mist were ethereal. Therefore, the melting processes didn't destroy them. As the lines of force along which the ice crystals form are present in water, so when the earth crystallized were those ethereal plant forms present in it. They were the moulds which drew to themselves the dense material forming the plant bodies of the present day, and also of the plant forms of the past which are embedded in the geological strata of the earth globe. These ethereal plant forms were aided in the formation when the heat came from outside and after the separation of the earth from the sun and the moon. That heat gave them the vital force to draw to themselves the denser substance. The Lemurian epoch is described in the work of the fifth day. This epoch, being the third, is in a sense a recapitulation of the moon period, and in the biblical narrative we find described such conditions as obtained in the moon period: water, fire fog, and the first attempts at moving, breathing life. Verses 20 and 21 tell us that Elohim said, "Let the waters bring forth life-breathing things and fowl." And Elohim formed the great amphibians and all life-breathing things according to their species, and all fowl with wings. This also harmonizes with the teaching of material science that the amphibians preceded the birds. The student is invited to note particularly that the things that were formed were not life. It doesn't say that life was created, but things that breathe or inhale life. The Hebrew word for that which they inhale is nephesh, and it should be carefully noted as we shall meet it in a new dress later. The Atlantean epoch is dealt with in the work of the sixth day. In verse 24, the creation of mammals is mentioned, and there the word nephesh again occurs, explaining that the mammals breathed life. Elohim said, "Let the earth bring forth life-breathing things, mammals." And in verse 27, Elohim formed man in their likenesses, male and female made they, Elohim, them. The Bible historian here omits the asexual and hermaphrodite human stages and comes to the two separate sexes as we know them now. He couldn't do otherwise, as he's describing in the Atlantean epoch, and by the time that stage in evolution was reached, there were neither sexless men nor hermaphrodites, the differentiation of the sexes having taken place earlier in the Lemurian epoch. That which afterwards became man could hardly be spoken of as man in the earlier stages of its development, as it differed but little from the animals. And therefore the Bible narrator is doing no violence to facts when he states that man was formed in the Atlantean period. In verse 28, all versions, will be found a very small prefix with a very great significance. Elohim said, "Be fruitful and replenish the earth." This plainly shows that the scribe who wrote it was cognizant of the occult teaching that the life wave had evolved here on Globe D of the Earth period in the previous revolutions. The Orion epoch corresponds to the seventh day of creation, when the Elohim rested from their labours as creators and guides, and humanity had been launched upon an independent career. This ends the story of the manner in which the forms were produced. In the following chapter, the story is told from the point of view which deals a little more with the life side. Jehovah and his mission. There has been much learned discussion concerning the discrepancy between, and especially the authorship of, the creation story of the first chapter and that which starts at the 4th verse of the second chapter. It's asserted that the two accounts were written by different men, because the being or beings, the name of whom the translators have rendered as God, in both the first and second chapters of the English version, are in the Hebrew text called Elohim in the first chapter and Jehovah in the second. It's argued that the same narrator would not have named God in two different ways. Had he meant the same God in both cases, he probably would not, but he was not a monotheist. He knew better than to think of God as simply a superior man, using the sky for a throne and the earth for a footstool. When he wrote of Jehovah, he meant the leader who had charge of the particular part of the work of creation which was then being described. Jehovah was and is one of the Elohim. He is the leader of the angels who were the humanity of the moon period, and he is regent of our moon. The reader is referred to diagram 14 for an accurate understanding of the position and constitution of Jehovah. As regent of our moon, he has charge of the degenerate evil beings there, and he also rules the angels. With him are some of the archangels, who were the humanity of the sun period. They are the race spirits. It's the work of Jehovah to build concrete bodies or forms by means of the hardening, crystallizing moon forces. Therefore he is the giver of children, and the angels are his messengers in this work. It's well known to physiologists that the moon is connected with gestation. At least they've observed that it measures and governs the period of intrauterine life and other physiological functions. The archangels, as spirits and leaders of a race, are known to fight for or against people, as the requirements of the evolution of that race demand. In Daniel, an archangel speaking to Daniel says, "And now I will return to fight with the prince of Persia, and when I am gone, lo, the prince of Grecia shall come." The archangel Michael is the race spirit of the Jews, but Jehovah is not the God of the Jews alone. He is the author of all race religions, which led up to Christianity. Nevertheless, it's true that he did take a special interest in the progenitors of the present degenerate Jews, the original Semites, the seed race for the 7 races of the Orion epoch. Jehovah, of course, takes special care of a seed race, in which are to be inculcated the embryonic faculties of the humanity of a new epoch. For that reason, he was particularly concerned with the original Semites. They were his chosen people, chosen to be the seed for a new race, which was to inherit the promised land, not merely insignificant Palestine, but the entire earth as it is at present. He didn't lead them out of Egypt. That story originated with their descendants and is a confused account of their journey eastward through flood and disaster, out of the doomed Atlantis into the wilderness, the desert of Gobi in Central Asia, there to wander during the Kabbalistic 40 years until they could enter the promised land. There is a double and peculiar significance to the descriptive word promised in this connection. The land was called the Promised Land because, as land or earth suitable for human occupation, it didn't exist at the time the chosen people were led into the wilderness. Part of the earth had been submerged by floods, and other parts changed by volcanic eruptions. Hence, it was necessary that a period of time elapse before the new earth was in a fit condition to become the possession of the Aryan race. The original Semites were set apart and forbidden to marry into other tribes or peoples, but they were a stiff-necked and hard people, being yet led almost exclusively by desire and cunning, and therefore they disobeyed the command. The Bible records that the sons of God married the daughters of man, the lower grades of their Atlantean compatriots. They thus frustrated the designs of Jehovah and were cast off. The fruit of such crossbreeding being useless as seed for a coming race. These crossbreeds were the progenitors of the present Jews who now speak of lost tribes. They know that some of the original number left them and went another way, but they don't know that those were the few who remained true. The story of the 10 tribes being lost is a fable. Most of them perished, but the faithful ones survived, and from that faithful remnant have descended the present Aryan races. The contention of the opponents of the Bible, that is a mere mutilation of the original writings, is cheerfully agreed to by occult science. Parts of it are even conceded to be entire fabrications, and no attempt is made to prove its authenticity as a whole, in the form we now have it. The present effort is simply an attempt to exhume a few kernels of occult truth from the bewildering mass of misleading and incorrect interpretations under which they have been buried by various translators and revisers. Involution, evolution, and epigenesis. Having in the foregoing paragraphs disentangled from the general confusion the identity and mission of Jehovah, it may be that we can now find harmony in the two seemingly contradictory accounts of the creation of man as recorded in the first and second chapter of Genesis, in the first of which it's written that he was the last, and in the second that he was the first created of all living beings. We note that the first chapter deals chiefly with the creation of form, the second chapter is devoted to the consideration of life, while the 5th chapter deals with consciousness. The key to the meaning, then, is that we must differentiate sharply between the physical form and the life that builds that form for its own expression. Although the chapter of the creation of the other kingdoms is not as correctly given in the second chapter as in the first, it's true that, if we consider man from the life side, he was created first, but if we consider him from the standpoint of form, as is done in the first chapter, he was created last. All through the course of evolution, through periods, globes, revolutions and races, those who don't improve by formation of new characteristics are held back and immediately begin to degenerate. Only that which remains plastic and pliable and adaptable for moulding into new forms suitable for the expression of the expanding consciousness. Only the life which is capable of outgrowing the possibilities for improvement inherent in the forms it ensouls can evolve with the pioneers of any life wave. All else must straggle on behind. This is the kernel of the occult teaching. Progress is not simply unfoldment, not simply involution and evolution. There is a third factor making a triad: involution, evolution, and epigenesis. The first two words are familiar to all who have studied life and form, but while it is generally admitted that the involution of spirit into matter takes place in order that form may be built, it is not so commonly recognized that the involution of spirit runs side by side with the evolution of form. From the very beginning of the Saturn period up to the time in the Atlantean epoch when man's eyes were opened by the Lucifer spirits, and as a consequence the activities of man, or the life force which has become man, were chiefly directed inward. That very same force which he now sends out from himself to build railways, boats, etc., was used internally in building a vehicle through which to manifest himself. This vehicle is threefold, like the spirit which built it. The same power by which man is now improving outside conditions was used during involution for purposes of internal growth. The form was built by evolution, the spirit built and entered it by involution, but the means for devising improvements is epigenesis. There is a strong tendency to regard all that is as the result of something that has been, all improvements on previously existing forms as being present in all forms as latencies, to regard evolution as simply the unfolding of germinal improvements. Such a conception excludes epigenesis from the scheme of things. It allows no possibility for the building of anything new, no scope for originality. The occultist believes the purpose of evolution to be the development of man from a static to a dynamic God, a creator. If the development he is at present undergoing is to be his education, and if during its progress he is simply unfolding latent actualities, where does he learn to create? If man's development consists solely in learning to build better and better forms according to models already existing in his creator's mind, he can become at best a good imitator, but never a creator. In order that he may become an independent original creator, it is necessary that his training should include sufficient latitude for the exercise of the individual originality which distinguishes creation from imitation. So long as certain features of the old form meet the requirements of progression, they are retained. But at each rebirth, the evolving life adds such original improvements as are necessary for its further expression. The pioneers of science are constantly brought face to face with epigenesis as a fact in all departments of nature. As early as 1759, Caspar Wolff published his Theoria Generationis, in which he shows that in the human ovum there is absolutely no trace of the coming organism, that its evolution consists of the addition of new formations, a building of something which is not latent in the ovum. Heindel, that great and fearless student of nature as he sees it, and very near to knowledge of the complete truth regarding evolution, says of the Theoria Generationis, despite its small compass and difficult terminology, it's one of the most valuable works in the whole literature of biology. Haeckel's own views we find thus stated in his Anthropogeny. Nowadays we are able hardly justified in calling epigenesis an hypothesis, as we've fully convinced ourselves of it being a fact and are able at any moment to demonstrate it by the help of a microscope. A builder would be a sorry craftsman were his abilities limited to the building of houses after only one particular model, which during his apprenticeship his master had taught him to imitate, but which he is unable to alter to meet new requirements. To be successful, he must be capable of designing new and better houses, improving that which experience teaches was not serviceable in the earlier buildings. The same force which the builder now directs outward to build houses better adapted to new conditions was used in the past periods to build new and better vehicles for the evolution of the ego. Starting with the simplest organisms, the life which is now man built the form to suit its necessities. In due time, as the entity progressed, it became evident that new improvements must be added which conflicted with the lines previously followed. A new start must be given it in a new species, where it could retrieve any previous mistakes which experience taught would preclude further development if the old lines were adhered to, and thus the evolving life would be enabled to progress further in a new species. When later experience proved that the new form also was inadequate, inasmuch as it could not adapt itself to some improvement necessary to the progress of the evolving life, it too was discarded, and still another departure made in a form adaptable to the necessary improvement. Thus, by successive steps does the evolving life improve its vehicles, and the improvements is still going on. Man, who is in the vanguard of progress, has built his bodies from the similitude of the amoeba up to the human form of the savage, and from that up through various grades until the most advanced races are now using the best and most highly organized bodies on earth. Between deaths and rebirths, we are constantly building bodies in which to function during our lives, and a far greater degree of efficiency than the present will yet be reached. If we make mistakes in building between lives, they become evident when we are using the body in earth life, and it's well for us if we are able to perceive and realise our mistakes, that we may avoid making them afresh life after life. But just as the builder of houses would lag commercially if he did not constantly improve his methods to meet the requirements of his business, so those who persistently adhere to the old forms fail to rise above the species and are left behind as stragglers. Those stragglers take the forms outgrown by the pioneers, as previously explained, and they compose the lower races and species of any kingdom in which they are evolving. As the life which is now man passed through stages analogous to the mineral, plant and animal kingdoms, and through the lower human races, stragglers were left all along the way who had failed to reach the necessary standard to keep abreast of the crest wave of evolution. They took the discarded forms of the pioneers and used them as stepping stones, by means of which they tried to overtake the others, but the advanced forms did not stand still. In the progress of evolution there is no halting pace. In evolving life, as in commerce, there is no such thing as merely holding your own. Progression or retrogression is the law. The form that is not capable of further improvement must degenerate. Therefore, there is one line of improving forms ensouled by the pioneers of the evolving life, and another line of degenerating forms, outgrown by the pioneers, but ensouled by the stragglers, as long as there are any stragglers of that particular life wave to which those forms originally belonged. When there are no more stragglers, the species gradually dies out, The forms have been crystallized beyond their possibility of being improved by tenets of increasing in ability. They therefore return to the mineral kingdom, fossilize, and are added to the different strata of the Earth's crust. The assertion of material science that man has ascended through the different kingdoms of plant and animal, which exist about us now, to anthropoid, and thence to man, is not quite correct. Man has never inhabited forms identical with those of our present-day animals, nor the present-day anthropoid species, but he's inhabited forms which were similar to, but higher than, those of the present anthropoids. The scientist sees that there is an anatomical likeness between man and the monkey, and as the evolutionary impulse always makes for improvement, he concludes that man must have descended from the monkey, but he is always baffled in his efforts to find the missing link connecting the two. From the point where the pioneers of our life wave, the Aryan races, occupied ape-like forms, they have progressed to their present stage of development, while the forms which were the missing link have degenerated and are now ensouled by the last stragglers of the Saturn period. The lower monkeys, instead of being the progenitors of the higher species, are stragglers, occupying the most degenerated specimens of what was once the human form. Instead of man having ascended from the anthropoids, the reverse is true. The anthropoids have degenerated from man. Material science, dealing only with form, has thus misled itself and drawn erroneous conclusions in this matter. These same relative conditions are to be found in the animal kingdom. The pioneers of the life wave, which entered evolution in the Sun period, are our present-day mammals. The different grades correspond to the steps once taken by man, but the forms are all degenerating under the management of the stragglers. Similarly, the pioneers of the life wave, which entered evolution in the Moon period, are found among the fruit trees, while the stragglers of that life wave ensoul all other plant forms. Each life wave, however, remains definitely confined within its own borders. The anthropoids may overtake us and become human beings, but no other animals will reach our particular point of development. They will reach a similar stage, but under different conditions in the Jupiter period. The present plants will be the humanity of the Venus period under a still greater difference of condition, and our minerals will reach the human stage under the conditions of the Vulcan period. It will be noted that the modern evolutionary theory, particularly that of Heindel, would, if it were completely reversed, be in almost perfect accord with the knowledge of occult science. The monkey has degenerated from man. The polyps are the last degeneration left behind by the mammals. The mosses are the lowest degenerations of the plant kingdom. The mineral kingdom is the final goal of the forms of all the kingdoms when they have reached the acme of degeneration. A corroboration of this is found in coal, which was once vegetable or plant forms, also in petrified wood and fossilized remains of various animal forms. Common stone or rock, which no scientist would admit had its origin in another kingdom, is to the occult investigator as truly mineralized plants as coal is itself. The mineralogist will learnedly explain that it's composed of hornblende, feldspar and mica, but the trained clairvoyant who can trace it back in the memory of nature through millions of years can supplement that statement by adding, yes, and that which you call hornblende and feldspar are the leaves and stems of prehistoric flowers, and the mica is all that remains of their petals. The occult teaching of evolution is also corroborated by the science of embryology in the antenatal recapitulation of all past stages of development. The difference between the ovum of a human being and of some kind of higher mammal, and even of the higher developments in the plant kingdom, is indistinguishable, even under microscopes. Experts are unable to tell which is animal and which is human. Even after several of the initial antenatal stages have been passed through, the experts cannot differentiate between animal and human embryo. But if the animal ovum is studied through the entire period of gestation, it will be observed that it passes through the mineral and plant stages only, and is born when it reaches the animal stage. This is because the life ensouling, such as the ovum, passed through its mineral evolution in the sun period, its plant life in the moon period, and is now forced to stop at the animal stage in the earth period. On where epigenesis is inactive in the individual, family, nation or race, their evolution ceases and degeneration commences. A living soul. Thus the two creation stories harmonise very well. One deals with form, which was built up through mineral, plant and animal, and reached the human last. The other tells us that life, which now ensouls human forms, was manifested anterior to the life which ensouls the forms of other kingdoms. One of these accounts of creation would not have been sufficient. There are important particulars hidden behind the narrative of man's creation. In the second chapter, the verse reads, "Then Jehovah formed man from the dust of the earth, and blew into his nostrils the breath, nephesh, and man became a breathing creature, nephesh chayim." In other places in the King James Version, nephesh is translated life, but in this particular instance it is rendered living soul, thus conveying the idea that there was a distinction made between the life that ensouled the human form and that which ensouled inferior creations. There is no authority whatever for this difference in translation, which is purely arbitrary. The life breath, nephesh, is the same in man and beast. This can be shown even to those who stand firmly upon the Bible as authority, for even the King James Version distinctly states in Ecclesiastes, "As the one dieth, so dieth the other. Yea, they all have one breath, nephesh, so that a man hath no preeminence above a beast. All go to one place." The animals are but our younger brothers, and though they are not now so finely organised, they will eventually reach a state as high as our own, and we shall then have ascended higher. It's contended that man received his soul in the way described in this 7th verse of the 2nd chapter of Genesis, and that he could have received it in no other way. It's pertinent to ask where and how woman received her soul. The meaning of the chapter and of the inspiration of the breath of life by Jehovah is very plain and clear when we use the occult key, and it has the further and immense advantage of being logical. The fact that the regent of the moon, Jehovah, with his angels and archangels, were the principals in this action, fixes the time when this creation occurred. It was between the early and middle parts of the Lemurian epoch, and must have been after the moon was thrown out from the earth, because Jehovah had nothing to do with the generation of bodies before the moon was thrown off. The forms were then more ethereal. There were no dense and concrete bodies. It's possible to make such bodies only by means of the hardening and crystallizing moon forces. It must have been in the first half of the Lemurian epoch, because the separation of the sexes, which is recorded later, took place in the middle of that epoch. At that time, man in the making had not yet commenced to breathe by means of lungs. He had the gill-like apparatus still present in the human embryo while passing through the stage of antenatal life corresponding to that epoch. He had no warm red blood, for at that stage there was no individual spirit. The entire form was soft and pliable, and the skeleton soft like cartilage. But the later date, when it became necessary to separate humanity into sexes, the skeleton had grown firm and solid. The work done by Jehovah was to build a dense, hard bone substance into the soft bodies already existing. Previous to this time, i.e. during the Polarian and Hyperborean epochs, neither animal nor man had bones. Adam's rib. The grotesque and impossible manner in which the separation of the sexes is said to have been accomplished, as described in the common versions of the Bible, and in this particular case in the Masoretic text also, is another example of what may be done by changing vowels in the Old Hebrew text. Read in one way, the work is rib, but in another, which has at least as good a claim to consideration, with the additional advantage of being common sense, it reads side. If we interpret this to mean that the man was male-female, and that Jehovah caused one side or sex in each being to remain latent, we shall not be doing violence to our reason, as we would be accepting the rib story. When this alternation is made, the occult teaching as previously given harmonizes with that of the Bible, and both agree with the teaching of modern science that man was bisexual at one time, before he developed one sex at the expense of the other. In corroboration of this, it is pointed out that the fetus is bisexual up to a certain point, and thereafter one sex predominates, while the other remains in abeyance, so that each person still has the opposite sex organs in a rudimentary form, and therefore is really bisexual, as was the primitive man. Apparently, the Bible narrator does not wish to give, in this second creation account, an accurate picture of the whole of evolution, but rather to particularize a little more what was said in the first chapter. He tells us that man didn't always breathe as he does now, that there was a time when he was not separated into sexes, and that it was Jehovah who effected the change. Thus fixing the time of the occurrence. As we proceed, it will be found that much further information is given. Guardian angels. During the earlier epochs and periods, the great creative hierarchies had worked upon humanity as it was unconsciously evolving. There had been only one common consciousness among all human beings, one group spirit for all mankind, as it were. In the Lemurian epoch, a new step was taken. Bodies had been definitely formed, but they must have warm red blood before they could be ensouled and become the abode of indwelling spirits. In nature, no process is sudden. We would get a wrong idea were we to imagine that air blown into the nostrils could put a soul into an image of clay and galvanize it into life as a sentient, thinking being. The individual spirit was very weak and impotent, and quite unfitted for the task of guiding its dense vehicle. In that respect, it wasn't yet very strong. To any qualified observer, it's evident that the desire body rules the personality much more than does the spirit, even at our present stage of advancement. But in the middle of the Lemurian epoch, when the lower personality, the threefold body, was to be endowed with the light of the ego, the latter, if left to itself, would have been absolutely powerless to guide its instrument. Therefore, it's necessary for someone much more highly evolved to help the individual spirit and gradually prepare the way for its complete union with its instruments. It was analogous to a new nation over which, until it becomes capable of forming a stable government for itself, some stronger power establishes a protectorate, guarding it alike from external dangers and internal indiscretions. Such a protectorate was exercised over evolving humanity by the race spirit, and is exercised over the animals by the group spirit in a somewhat different way. Jehovah is the Most High. He is the race god, as one might express it, having dominion over all form. He is the chief ruler and the highest power in maintaining the form and exercising an orderly government over it. The archangels are the race spirits, each having dominion over a certain group of people. They also have dominion over animals, while the angels have dominion over plants. The archangels have dominion over races or groups of people, and also over the animals, for these two kingdoms have desire bodies, and the archangels are expert architects of desire matter, because in the Sun period the densest globe was composed of that material, and the humanity of that period, who are now archangels, learned to build their densest vehicles of desire stuff, as we are now learning to build our bodies of the chemical elements whereof our earth globe is composed. Thus it will be readily understood that the archangels are particularly qualified to help later life waves through the stage when they learn to build and control a desire body. For analogous reasons, the angels work in the vital bodies of man, animal and plant. Their densest bodies are composed of ether, and so was the globe D in the moon period, when they were human. Jehovah and his archangels, therefore, hold a similar relation to races that the group spirit does to animals. When individual members of a race have evolved entire self-control and government, they are emancipated from the influence of the race spirit and kindred beings. As we've seen, the point of vantage of the group spirit, as of any ego in the dense body, is in the blood. The Masoretic text shows that this knowledge was possessed by the writer of Leviticus. In the 14th verse of the 17th chapter, the Jews are prohibited from eating blood because the soul of all flesh is in the blood. And in the 11th verse of the same chapter, we find the words, "For the soul of the flesh is in the blood. The blood itself mediates for the soul," which shows that this applies to both man and beast, for the word here used in Hebrew is neshama, which means soul, not life, as is rendered in the King James Version. The ego works directly through the blood. The race spirit guides the races by working in the blood, as the group spirit guides the animals of its species through the blood. So also does the ego control its own vehicle, but with a difference. The ego operates by means of the heat of the blood, while the race, i.e. tribal or family spirit, works by means of the air, as it's drawn into the lungs. That is why Jehovah or his messengers breathed into man's nostrils, and thereby securing admission for the race spirit, community spirits, etc. The different classes of race spirits guided their peoples to various climates and differing parts of the earth. To the trained clairvoyant, a tribal spirit appears as a cloud, enveloping and permeating the atmosphere of the whole country, inhabited by the people under its dominion. Thus are produced the different peoples and nations. Paul spoke of the prince of the power of the air, or principalities and powers, showing that he knew of the race spirits, but now not even an attempt is made to understand what they mean, although their influence is strongly felt. Patriotism is one of the sentiments emanating from and fostered by them. It has not now so much power over people as formerly. There are some who are being liberated from the race spirit and can say with Thomas Paine, "The world is my country." There are those who can leave father and mother and look upon all men as brothers. They are being liberated from the family spirit or spirit of the clan, which is different from the race spirit, an etheric entity. Others again, who are deep in the toil of the race or family spirit, will suffer the most dreadful depression if they leave home or country and breathe the air of another race or family spirit. At the time the race spirit entered human bodies, the individualized ego commenced to get some slight control of its vehicles. Each human entity became more and more conscious of being separate and distinct from other men. Yet for ages he did not think of himself primarily as an individual, but as belonging to a tribe or family. The affix son to many present-day surnames is a remnant of this feeling. A man was not simply John or James, he was John Robertson or James Williamson. In some countries a woman was not Mary or Martha, she was Mary, Martha's daughter. Martha, Mary's daughter. The custom was continued in some European countries until within a few generations of the present time the son affix remains with us and the family name is still much honoured. Among the Jews, even down to the time of Christ, the race spirit was stronger than the individual spirit. Every Jew thought of himself first as belonging to a certain tribe or family. His proudest boast was that he was of the seed of Abraham, and all this was the work of the race spirit. Previous to the advent of Jehovah, when the earth was yet a part of the sun, there was one common group spirit composed of all creative hierarchies which controlled the entire human family, but it was intended that each body should be the temple and pliable instrument of an indwelling spirit, and that man, an infinite division of rulership, Jehovah came with his angel and archangels and made the first great division into races, and giving to each group the guiding influence of a race spirit, an archangel. For each ego, he appointed one of the angels to act as guardian, until the individual spirit had grown strong enough to become emancipated from all outside influence. Mixing blood in marriage. Christ came to prepare the way for the emancipation of humanity from the guidance of differentiating race and family spirit, and to unite the whole human family in one universal brotherhood. He taught that Abraham's seed referred to the bodies only, and called their attention to the fact that before Abraham lived, the I, the ego, was in existence. The threefold individual spirit had its being before all tribes and races, and it will remain when they have passed away, and even the memory of them is no more. The threefold spirit in man, the ego, is the God within, whom the personal bodily man must learn to follow. Therefore did Christ say that to be his disciple, a man must forsake all he had. His teaching points to the emancipation of the God within. He calls upon man to exercise his prerogative as an individual and rise above family, tribe and nation. Not that he is to disregard kin and country. He must fulfill all duties, but he is to cease identifying himself with part and must recognize an equal kinship with all the world. That is the ideal given to mankind by Christ. Under the rule of the race spirit, the nation, tribe or family was considered first, the individual last. the family must be kept intact. If any man dies without leaving offspring to perpetuate his name, his brother must carry seed to the widow, that there might be no dying out. Marrying out of the family was regarded with horror in earliest times. A member of one tribe could not become connected with another without losing caste in his own. It was not an easy matter to become a member of another family. Not only among the Jews and the other early nations was the integrity of the family insisted upon, but also in more modern times. As previously mentioned, the Scots, even in comparatively recent times, clung tenaciously to their clan, and the old Norse Vikings would take no one into their families without first mixing blood. For the spiritual effects of hemolysis, which are known to material science and were known of old. All these customs resulted from the working of race and tribal spirit in the common blood. To admit as a member one in whom that common blood did not flow would have caused confusion of caste. The closer the inbreeding, the greater the power of the race spirit, and the stronger the ties that bound the individual to the tribe, because the vital force of the man is in his blood. Memory is ultimately connected with the blood, which is the highest expression of the vital body. The brain and the nervous system are the highest expression of the desire body. They call up pictures of the outside world, but in mental imagination. The blood brings the material for the pictures, and therefore when the thought is active, the blood flows to the head. When the same unmixed strain of blood flows in the veins of a family for generations, the same mental pictures made by the great-grandfather, grandfather and father are reproduced in the son by the family spirit which lived in the hemoglobin of the blood. He sees himself in the continuation of a long line of ancestors who live in him. He sees all the events of the past lives of the family as though he had been present, and therefore he does not realize himself as an ego. He is not simply David, but the son of Abraham, not Joseph, but the son of David. By means of this common blood, men are said to have lived for many generations, because through the blood their descendants had access to the memory of nature, in which the records of the lives of their ancestors were preserved. That is why, in the 5th chapter of Genesis, it stated that the patriarchs lived for centuries. Adam, Methuselah, and the other patriarchs did not personally attain to such great age, but they lived in the consciousness of their descendants, who saw the lives of their ancestors as if they had lived them. And after the expiration of the period stated, the descendants did not think of themselves as Adam or Methuselah. Memory of those ancestors faded, and so it is said that they died. The second sight of the Scotch Highlanders shows that by means of endogamy, the consciousness of the inner world is retained. They have practiced marrying in the clan until recent times, also in gypsies, who always marry in the tribe. The smaller the tribe and the closer the inbreeding, the more pronounced is the sight. The earlier races would not have dared to disobey the injunction issued by the tribal god not to marry outside of the tribe, nor had they any inclination to do so, for they had no mind of their own. The original Semites were the first to evolve will, and they at once married the daughters of the men of other tribes, frustrating temporarily the design of their race spirit, and being promptly ejected as evildoers who had gone a-whoring after strange gods, and thereby rendering themselves unfit to give the seed for the 7 races of our present Aryan epoch. The original Semites were, for the time being, the last race that the race spirit cared to keep separate. and later man was given free will. The time had come when he was to be prepared for individualization. The former common consciousness, the involuntary clairvoyance or second sight, which constantly held before a tribesman the pictures of his ancestors' lives and caused him to feel most closely identified with the tribe or family, was to be replaced for a time by a strictly individual consciousness confined to the material world, so as to break up the nations into individuals, so that the brotherhood of man, regardless of exterior circumstances, may become a fact. This is on the same principle that if we have a number of buildings and wish to make them into one large structure, it's necessary to break them up into separate bricks. Only then can the large building be constructed. In order to accomplish this separation of nations into individuals, laws were given which prohibited endogamy or marriage in the family, and henceforth incestuous marriages came to be regarded with horror. Strange blood has thus been introduced into all the families of the earth, and it has gradually wiped out the involuntary clairvoyance which promoted the clannish feeling and segregated humanity into groups. Altruism is superseding patriotism, and loyalty to the family is disappearing in consequence of the mixture of blood. Science has lately discovered that hemolysis results from the inoculation of the blood of one individual into the veins of another of a different species, causing the death of the lower of the two. Thus, any animal inoculated with the blood of a man dies. The blood of a dog transfused into the veins of a bird kills the bird, but it won't hurt the dog to have the bird's blood inoculated into its veins. Science merely states the fact. The occult scientist gives the reason. The blood is the vantage ground of the spirit, as shown elsewhere. The ego in man works in its own vehicles by means of the heat of that blood. The race, family or community spirit gains entrance to the blood by means of the air we inspire. In the animals are also both the separate spirit of the animal and the group spirit of the species to which it belongs, but in the spirit of the animal is not individualized and does not work self-consciously with its vehicles as does the ego. Hence is altogether dominated by the group spirit which works in the blood. When the blood of a higher animal is inoculated into the veins of one from a lower species, the spirit in the blood of the higher animal is of course stronger than the spirit of the less evolved. Hence, when it endeavours to assert itself, it kills the imprisoning form and liberates itself. When, on the other hand, the blood of a lower species is inoculated into the veins of a higher animal, the higher spirit is capable of ousting the less evolved spirits in the strange blood and assimilating the blood to its own purposes, and therefore no obvious catastrophe ensues. The fall of man. In connection with the analysis of Genesis, a few more words must be said about the fall, which is the backbone and sinew of popular Christianity. Had there been no fall, there would have been no need for the plan of salvation. When in the middle of the Lemurian epoch the separation of the sexes occurred, the ego began to work slightly upon the dense body, building organs within. Man was not at that time the wide-awake conscious being he is at present, but by means of half the sex force he was building a brain for the expression of thought as previously described. He was more awake in the spiritual world than in the physical, hardly saw his body, and was not conscious of the act of propagation. The Bible statement that Jehovah put man to sleep when he was to bring forth is correct. There was no pain nor trouble connected with childbirth, nor, because of man's exceedingly dim consciousness of his physical surroundings, did he know anything of the loss of his dense body by death, or of his instalment in a new dense vehicle at birth. It will be remembered that the Lucifers were a part of the humanity of the moon period. They are the stragglers of the life wave of the angels, too far advanced to take a dense physical body, yet they needed an inner organ for the acquisition of knowledge, and moreover they could work through a physical brain, which the angels or Jehovah could not. These spirits entered the spinal cord and brain and spoke to the woman, whose imagination, as explained elsewhere, had been aroused by the training of the Lemurian race. As her consciousness was principally internal, a picture consciousness of them was received by her, and she saw them as serpents, for they had entered her brain by the serpentine spinal cord. The training of the woman included watching the perilous feats and fights of the men in developing will, in which fights bodies were necessarily often killed. The dim consciousness of something unusual set the imagination of the woman to wondering why she saw these strange things. She was conscious of the spirits of those who had lost their bodies, but her imperfect sense of the physical world failed to reveal these friends whose dense bodies had been destroyed. The Lucifers solved the problem for her by opening her eyes. They revealed to her her own body and that of the man, and taught her how, together, they might conquer death by creating new bodies. Thus death could not touch them, for they, like Jehovah, could create at will. Lucifer opened the eyes of woman. She sought the help of man and opened his eyes. Thus, in a very real though dim way, they first knew or became aware of one another and also of the physical world. They became conscious of death and pain, and by this knowledge they learned to differentiate between the inner man and the outer garment he wears and renews each time it's necessary to take his next step in evolution. They ceased to be automatons and became free-thinking beings at the cost of freedom from pain, sickness and death. That the interpretation of the eating of the fruit as a symbol of the generative act is not a far-fetched idea. It's shown by the declaration of Jehovah, which is not a curse at all, but simply a statement of the consequences that would follow the act, that they will die and that the woman will bear her children in pain and suffering. He knew that, as man's attention had now been called to his physical garment, he would become aware of its loss by death. He also knew that man had not yet wisdom to bridle his passion and regulate sexual intercourse by the positions of the planets, and therefore pain in childbirth must follow his ignorant abuse of the function. It's always been a sore puzzle to Bible commentators what connection there could possibly be between the eating of fruit and the bearing of children. But if we understand that the eating of the fruit is symbolical of the generative act whereby man becomes like God, inasmuch as he knows his kind and is thus able to generate new beings, the solution is easy. In the latter part of the Lemurian epoch, when man arrogated to himself the prerogative of performing the generative act when he pleased, it was his then powerful will that enabled him to do so. By eating of the tree of knowledge at any and all times, he was able to create a new body whenever he lost an old vehicle. We usually think of death as something to be dreaded. Had man also eaten of the tree of life, had he learned the secret of how to perpetually vitalize his body, there would have been a worse condition. We know that our bodies are not perfect today, and in those ancient days they were exceedingly primitive. Therefore, the anxiety of the creative hierarchies, lest man eat of the tree of life also and become capable of renewing his vital body, was well founded. Had he done so, he would have been immortal indeed, but would never have been able to progress. The evolution of the ego depends upon its vehicles, and if it could not get new and improving ones by death and rebirth, there would be stagnation. It's an occult maxim that the oftener we die, the better we are able to live, for every birth gives us a new chance. We've seen that brain knowledge, with its concomitant selfishness, was bought by man at the cost of power to create from himself alone. He bought his free will at the cost of pain and death. But when man learns to use his intellect for the good of humanity, he will gain spiritual power over life, and in addition will be guided by an innate knowledge as much higher than the present brain consciousness as that is higher than the lowest animal consciousness. The fall into generation was necessary to build the brain, but that is at best only an indirect way of gaining knowledge, and will be superseded by direct touch with the wisdom of nature, which man, without any cooperation, will then be able to use for the generation of new bodies. The larynx will again speak the lost word, the creative fiat, which under the guidance of great teachers was used in ancient Lemuria in the creation of plants and animals. Man will then be a creator in very truth, not in the slow and toilsome manner of the present day, but by use of the proper word or magical formula will he be able to create a body. All that was manifested during the descending period of involution remains until the corresponding point on the ascending arc of evolution has been reached. The present generative organs will degenerate and atrophy. The female organ was the first to come into existence as a separate unit, and according to the law that the first shall be last, will be the last to atrophy. The male organ was differentiated last, and is even now commencing to divide itself from the body. Interesting end to that chapter. That was a very long chapter. I hope you were able to follow that. So that concludes chapter 14 of Heindel's Rosicrucian Cosmo Conception. Thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you at chapter 15.